the fastest interceptor ever planned, and why the Pentagon got cold feet. What Aviation Week revealed on February 15, 1954, landed like a hammer blow. According to the report, the Soviet Union now possessed jet bombers capable of reaching the United States with nuclear weapons, and they could do it without refueling. At first, many people brushed the claim off as pure alarmism, but just 5 weeks later, disbelief evaporated. During a flyover above Moscow, 28 Mach M4 bombers thundered through the sky. If production continued at that rate, the Soviet Union could have more than 800 of these aircraft by 1960, and once deployed in such numbers, they would be nearly impossible to stop. So the question became unavoidable. What did the United States actually have to defend itself? The answer was unsettling. America's frontline interceptor could barely reach Mach 1. Worse still, it was already obsolete before it had even properly entered service. There appeared to be only one solution to what was now being called the bomber gap, and it sounded almost insane. The United States would have to build a Mach 3 super interceptor, an aircraft fast enough to chase Soviet bombers halfway across the Atlantic. And by the time that interceptor appeared on Soviet radar screens, it would be carrying something truly terrifying, a nuclear-tipped missile, derisively nicknamed a flying telephone pole. By the mid-1950s, a heavy sense of dread hung over America. The Cold War had reached one of its coldest moments, and nuclear conflict felt less like a distant possibility and more like an approaching certainty. Across the country, school children were drilled to hide beneath their desks during duck-and-cover exercises, gestures that would have been meaningless in the face of atomic fire. Families, meanwhile, dug fallout shelters in their backyards, filling them with canned food in preparation for a radioactive future they feared was inevitable. Far to the north, along the 69th parallel stretching from Alaska to Greenland, technicians manned the bleak and isolated radar stations of the distant early warning line. Their job was simple and terrifying: to scan the vast Arctic sky, watching for the faint radar blips of Soviet bombers racing over the North Pole toward American cities. That fear was constantly reinforced by what Americans saw coming out of Moscow. During May Day parades, formations of new Soviet bombers roared over Red Square. Aircraft like the T-16 Badger, the massive Mach M4 Bison, and the enormous turboprop T-95 Bear sent a chilling message. Together, these bombers suggested a powerful force capable of delivering an intercontinental nuclear strike. U.S. intelligence agencies even suspected that the Soviets were working on an advanced delta-wing supersonic bomber. This rapidly growing bomber fleet posed a terrifying challenge for the U.S. Air Defense Command. By 1955, it had no real answer. America's primary interceptor, the Convair F-0102 Delta Dagger, was already behind schedule and, more importantly, could barely exceed Mach 1. At those speeds, the F-102 would have no chance of catching modern Soviet bombers before they reached their weapon release points. This weakness seeped into public consciousness and became known nationwide as the bomber gap. Inside the Pentagon, senior Air Force leaders studied maps, intelligence summaries, and performance charts for America's existing fighters. What they concluded was deeply troubling. The strategy simply was not working. Building a slightly bigger or faster version of what they already had would not solve the problem. The threat was evolving far too quickly. Only a dramatic, revolutionary leap in technology could possibly keep pace. What emerged was the idea for an entirely new type of aircraft, an interceptor capable of flying at speeds once reserved for science fiction. It would be able to operate hundreds of miles from American shores and destroy enemy bombers long before they could approach U.S. airspace. This aircraft would become America's shield, a manned guardian tasked with
For 3 weeks, more than 70 Air Force officers, engineers, and senior leaders examined the mock-up in detail. They walked around the nearly 90-foot-long structure, peered into the cockpit, inspected the weapons bay, and ran their hands along the smooth fuselage and cranked delta wings. They marked suggested changes, debated instrument layouts, and scrutinized maintenance access. Remarkably, they found very little to criticize. The design was judged fundamentally sound, a testament to Stormy Storms and his team. Confidence in the program soared. In May 1959, the Air Force officially named the aircraft the Rapier, a title submitted by an enlisted sergeant. The name was fitting. A rapier is a swift, slender, and deadly weapon, just as this aircraft was meant to be America's blade against Soviet bombers. Yet even as confidence peaked, the strategic landscape was shifting. In Washington, a fierce debate erupted within the Pentagon and on Capitol Hill. The Soviet launch of Sputnik in 1957 had ignited the space race and shifted focus toward missile technology. Many defense analysts and politicians argued that intercontinental ballistic missiles, not manned aircraft, represented the future of warfare. Why invest billions in 480 Mach 3 fighters, they asked, when nuclear missiles could cross the globe in minutes? In their view, manned bombers and interceptors were becoming obsolete. By early 1959, the Rapier's fate hung in the balance. Air Force Chief of Staff General Thomas D. White entered the fight, forcefully defending the program. Testifying before the Senate Armed Services Committee in February 1959, he warned that surrendering air defense entirely to automated systems would be a grave mistake. White argued that manned interceptors were essential not just for interception, but for identification, something missiles could not do. He insisted that no automatic system, whether the Army's Nike Zeus or the Air Force's Beaumark, could replace human judgment. He summarized his stance with a defining statement: no purely automatic system can match the judgment, flexibility, and intelligence of the man in the cockpit. Despite his defense, budget pressures mounted. President Eisenhower's administration was determined to rein in defense spending. Budget Director Maurice Stantz pushed Secretary of Defense Neil McElroy to cut costs wherever possible. The F-108 and the B-70 Valkyrie became prime targets. The F-108's projected cost, about $4 billion for nearly 500 aircraft, over $33 billion today, shocked Eisenhower himself. By late 1958, the pressure was unmistakable. The Air Force cut its planned order of 31 YF-108 prototypes down to around 20. Meanwhile, U-2 spy plane intelligence revealed the bomber gap was largely a myth. Soviet bomber numbers were far lower than feared, and missiles, not bombers, were becoming their primary strategic weapon. As engineer Richard Schmidt later put it, nothing was wrong with the design, it was simply the wrong time. On September 23, 1959, the Air Force issued a brief statement terminating the F-108 program. The Rapier was canceled before a single prototype flew. The Air Force contract with North American Aviation for the development of the F-108 long-range interceptor is being terminated. Just months after being proudly christened the Rapier, the program was canceled before a single rivet had ever been driven into a prototype aircraft. The official explanation was a reappraisal of strategic priorities, a cold, bureaucratic phrase that concealed a dramatic shift in military doctrine and the unforgiving realities of budget restraint. At the time of cancellation, the total research and development spending was estimated between $140 and $150 million in 1959 dollars, a significant amount, but only a small fraction of what the full program would have ultimately cost. For the thousands of men and women who had lived and breathed the F-108 for years, the announcement was devastating. At North American's Los Angeles